Before we jump into this story, we'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Now, let's begin. Daniel Harper had exactly 3 weeks left. 3 weeks until retirement. 3 weeks until he could turn in his badge, hang up his uniform, and finally stop carrying the weight of a town that had forgotten how to look after its own. 67 years old, 42 years on the force. He'd seen enough, or so he thought. The call came in at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in late October. Unit 12, we have a possible disturbance at 847 Maple Street, Apartment B. Neighbor reported hearing children crying. Low priority. Low priority. That's what they always said about Maple Street. Daniel sat in his patrol car outside the 24-hour diner, finishing lukewarm coffee that tasted like cardboard. He could ignore it. Pass it to the next shift. It wasn't technically his jurisdiction anyway. He'd learned that lesson 5 years ago. A concerned citizen call. A mother working double shifts. Daniel had knocked on the door, asked too many questions, suggested the kids looked underfed. The complaint had been filed within 48 hours. Officer Harper engaged in profiling and overreach. The words had gone into his permanent record. He'd been more careful since then. Mind your business. Follow protocol. 3 more weeks and none of this would be his problem anymore. But something made him put the car and drive. Maybe it was the word children. Maybe it was the cold rain starting to fall. Maybe it was just habit. He pulled up to 847 Maple Street 15 minutes later. The duplex looked like it was barely standing. Peeling paint, broken gutter hanging loose, a dim porch light flickering like it might give up any second. Daniel climbed the creaking wooden steps and knocked. No answer. He knocked again, harder this time. Still nothing. He waited. Rain soaked through his jacket. His radio crackled with static from another call across town. This was it. He'd done his duty, checked the address. No visible emergency. He could mark it as no contact, situation appears stable, and move on. He turned to leave. That's when he heard it, not a scream, not crying. A sound so faint he almost missed it. A soft moan, like someone in pain trying not to make noise. Daniel's hand froze on the railing. Every instinct told him to walk away. To call social services in the morning. To let someone else handle it. He had 3 weeks left. 3 weeks until he could finally stop making decisions that might come back to haunt him. But his daughter's voice echoed in his memory. The hospital room. The machines beeping, her hand growing cold in his. Dad, don't let anyone else go through this. He'd promised her, and he'd broken that promise every day since. Daniel's hand moved to the door handle. It turned, unlocked. He pushed the door open slowly. Hello, this is Officer Harper with Millbrook Police. Is anyone home? Silence. Then from somewhere inside the dark apartment, that sound again, weak, desperate. A child's voice, barely a whisper. Help! Daniel stepped inside. The apartment was freezing. Daniel's breath came out in small clouds as he stepped further inside. No heat. The kind of cold that settles into your bones and doesn't let go. He flicked the light switch. Nothing. He pulled out his flashlight and the beam cut through the darkness. The living room was nearly empty. A thin mattress on the floor. A small table with 2 mismatched chairs. Dishes piled in the sink. The refrigerator door hung slightly open, revealing nothing but a half-empty jar of peanut butter and a carton of milk that had probably gone bad weeks ago. But it was what he saw in the corner that made his heart stop. 2 girls. The older one, maybe 11, lay on the floor wrapped in a thin blanket that had seen better days. Her face was pale, almost gray. Her stomach was swollen beneath an oversized sweater, unnaturally large for such a thin frame. The younger one, perhaps 5 years old, slept curled against her sister's side, trying to keep her warm. Daniel knelt down slowly, his knees protesting. Hey, he said softly. Can you hear me? The older girl's eyes fluttered open. They were dull, exhausted. Eyes that had seen too much and expected nothing good. She didn't look surprised to see a police officer. She didn't look scared. She just looked resigned. Where are your parents? Daniel asked gently. The girl's lips moved, but no sound came out at first. She tried again. "Gone," she whispered. "Gone where?" "Don't know. Mama left 3 weeks ago. Said she'd be back." 3 weeks. These children had been alone for 3 weeks. Daniel's radio crackled. Dispatch asking for a status update on another call. The sound made the younger girl stir slightly but didn't wake her. "What's your name?" Daniel asked. "Sarah." "Okay, Sarah. I'm Daniel. I'm going to help you. What's your sister's name?" "Ellie." "How old is Ellie?" 5. Daniel's eyes moved back to Sarah's swollen stomach. He'd been a cop long enough to recognize what most people would think when they saw an 11-year-old girl with a belly like that. But something told him this was different. Something was very wrong. "Sarah, are you in pain?" She nodded just barely. "How long have you been hurting?" "Long time. Gets worse." Daniel reached for his radio, his hand steady despite the anger building in his chest. Anger at a system that let children fall through cracks this wide. Anger at a mother who'd disappeared. Anger at himself for almost walking away. "Dispatch, this is Unit 12. I need an ambulance at 847 Maple Street, Apartment B. Immediate. 2 juveniles, one appears to be in medical distress." "Copy that, Unit 12. Ambulance en route. ETA 8 minutes." Daniel set the radio down and looked at Sarah again. "The ambulance is coming. They're going to take you to the hospital and figure out what's wrong, okay?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Are they going to take Ellie away from me?" The question hit Daniel like a punch. "No," he said, even though he had no authority to make that promise. "I'm going to make sure you stay together." Sarah's hand reached out and gripped his with surprising strength. "Please," she whispered. "She's all I have." Daniel squeezed her hand gently. "I know, sweetheart. I know." He looked around the cold, dark apartment. At the empty refrigerator. At the mattress on the floor. At 2 children who'd been surviving in silence while the world drove past without noticing. And he made a decision. He wasn't walking away this time. Not tonight. Not ever. Daniel pulled the thin blanket tighter around Sarah while they waited for the ambulance. Ellie stirred, her eyes opening slowly. When she saw Daniel's uniform, she pressed closer to her sister. "It's okay," Sarah whispered to her. "He's helping us." But Ellie's eyes stayed wide with fear. Daniel had seen that look before. The look of a child who'd learned that adults couldn't be trusted. That promises meant nothing. That help always came with a price. He'd seen that same look in his daughter's eyes years ago. Her name was Rebecca. She'd been 26 when the stomach pains started. Young, healthy, full of life. She'd gone to 3 different doctors over the course of 4 months. Each one had told her the same thing. "It's stress. You're working too hard. Try changing your diet. Young women your age often experience digestive issues. It's normal. Normal." By the time someone finally ordered the right tests, the autoimmune disease had destroyed her kidneys beyond repair. Daniel had sat beside her hospital bed for 3 weeks, watching machines breathe for her, watching her fade a little more each day. He'd held her hand when she'd whispered, voice barely audible through the oxygen mask, "Dad, don't let this happen to someone else. Don't let doctors ignore people. Promise me." He'd promised. She died on a Thursday morning while rain hammered against the hospital windows. That was 11 years ago. And Daniel had spent every day since then telling himself there was nothing he could have done differently. That the system had failed her. That the doctors were to blame. But deep down, he knew the truth. He'd failed her too. He'd believed the doctors when they said it was nothing. He'd told Rebecca she was worrying too much. He'd said, "If they say you're fine, you're probably fine." He'd stopped asking questions, just like he'd almost stopped asking questions tonight. The sound of sirens pulled him back to the present. Red and blue lights flashed through the broken blinds. The ambulance pulled up outside, followed by a second police unit. 2 paramedics rushed in with a stretcher and medical bags. "What do we have?" the older paramedic asked, kneeling beside Sarah. 11-year-old female, possible abdominal distress. She's been experiencing pain for an extended period. No parent or guardian present. The paramedic's eyes widened slightly when he saw Sarah's swollen stomach, but he kept his expression professional. "Okay, sweetheart, we're going to take care of you," he said gently, pulling out a blood pressure cuff. Ellie grabbed Sarah's hand. "Don't take her." "We're taking both of you," Daniel said firmly. "You're staying together." The younger paramedic looked at Daniel. "Sir, we can only transport the patient unless—" "They're both coming," Daniel interrupted. "I'll ride with them and sort out the paperwork at the hospital." The paramedic hesitated, then nodded. They lifted Sarah carefully onto the stretcher. She winced but didn't cry out. Daniel noticed how she bit her lip, holding back pain she'd probably been carrying for months. How long had she been suffering in silence? How many people had walked past this apartment and heard nothing? How many times had someone almost helped, then decided it wasn't their problem? Ellie climbed into the ambulance and sat close to her sister. Daniel followed, settling onto the bench seat across from them. As the ambulance doors closed and the siren wailed to life, Sarah looked at him with those tired, old eyes. "Thank you for not leaving," she whispered. Daniel's throat tightened. He thought of Rebecca. He thought of all the promises he'd broken. "I should have come sooner," he said quietly. But Sarah just closed her eyes and held her sister's hand. And Daniel made a silent vow. This time, he wouldn't look away. This time, he wouldn't stop until he knew they were safe, even if it cost him everything. The emergency room at Millbrook Regional Hospital was unusually quiet for a Tuesday night. A nurse led Sarah into an examination room while Daniel stayed with Ellie in the waiting area. The little girl sat rigidly in the plastic chair, eyes fixed on the double doors where her sister had disappeared. "She'll be okay," Daniel said, though he wasn't sure he believed it himself. Ellie didn't respond. A tired-looking woman in her 50s approached, clipboard in hand. Her badge read, "Patricia Gonzalez, Social Services." Daniel stood. That was fast. "Hospital protocol for unaccompanied minors," Patricia said, sitting down across from him. "I need to ask you some questions, Officer Harper." For the next 20 minutes, Daniel explained everything he'd found. Patricia took notes, her expression growing darker with each detail. "And you said the mother's been gone 3 weeks?" "That's what the older girl told me." Patricia pulled out her tablet and began searching through databases. Her fingers moved quickly, clicking through screens. "Monroe, Sarah Monroe, age 11. Ellie Monroe, age 5. She paused. "Mother is Jennifer Monroe, history of substance issues. Enrolled in a treatment program 8 months ago but dropped out after 6 weeks. She scrolled further. "There's a flag here from Millbrook Elementary. Filed October 14th by a teacher named Margaret Thompson. Concerns about Sarah's attendance and physical changes." Daniel leaned forward. "What kind of follow-up was done?" Patricia's jaw tightened. "It was categorized as low priority. We have 847 open cases in this county and 12 caseworkers. So nothing was done. The report was logged. That's all the system requires." She looked up at him, and he saw the exhaustion in her eyes. "We're drowning, Officer Harper. We do triage. The kids who are actively in danger get attention first." Daniel felt anger rising in his chest, but he forced it down. Patricia wasn't the enemy. She was just another person trapped in a broken system. "Was there anything else?" he asked. Patricia scrolled through more files. "There's a medical visit on September 22nd. Sarah was seen at the county health clinic for abdominal pain and swelling. The attending physician," she squinted at the screen, "Dr. Ashok Patel, noted possible malnutrition and recommended follow-up imaging." And the referral was submitted to the state insurance program but rejected due to incomplete guardian documentation. Without a parent present to sign consent forms, they couldn't proceed. Daniel's hands clenched into fists. "There's also an anonymous call logged September 28th, Patricia continued. "Neighbor reported possible child neglect at the residence. Responding officer noted that situation appeared stable." She looked up at him. "That was you, wasn't it?" Daniel's stomach dropped. He pulled out his phone and opened his work email, scrolling back through months of reports. There it was. September 28th, 10:15 p.m. Responded to welfare check at 847 Maple Street. Made contact with older minor who stated mother was at work. Residence modest but appeared adequate. No immediate signs of danger. Situation stable. No further action required. His own words. His own signature. He'd been there. He'd stood outside that apartment, talked to Sarah for maybe 5 minutes through a cracked door, and decided everything was fine because she'd told him what he wanted to hear. He'd had other calls waiting. It was late. He was tired. And he'd learned not to dig too deep unless there was obvious evidence of danger. He'd written situation stable and driven away. That was 6 weeks ago. Patricia was watching him carefully. "You didn't know," she said quietly. "I should have known. Should have looked closer. So should the teacher. So should the doctor. So should the neighbor who called it in." She closed her tablet. "So should I, for that matter. That flag from the school crossed my desk. I meant to assign it to someone, but there were cases that seemed more urgent." She stood up. "We all failed these girls, Officer Harper. The question is, what do we do now?" Before Daniel could answer, a doctor emerged from the examination area. Young, maybe 35, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Are you here with Sarah Monroe?" he asked. Daniel and Patricia both stood. "I'm Dr. Michael Chen. I need to speak with you about Sarah's condition." His expression was serious. Too serious. "What's wrong with her?" Daniel asked. Dr. Chen glanced at Ellie, who was watching with wide eyes, then back at Daniel. "Perhaps we should talk privately." Daniel's chest tightened. Whatever the doctor was about to say, it wasn't good. "Doctor." Chen led them to a small consultation room down the hall. 4 chairs, a box of tissues on the table, the kind of room designed for delivering bad news. Patricia sat down and pulled out a notebook. Daniel remained standing, too restless to sit. Sarah's initial examination shows significant abdominal distension. Dr. Chen began, choosing his words carefully. "We've drawn blood and ordered imaging, but I wanted to talk to you both before we proceed." "Proceed with what?" Daniel asked. "Treatment. The problem is we need parental consent for anything beyond emergency stabilization. And given Sarah's age and condition, we need to move carefully." Patricia leaned forward. "Doctor, I'm with County Social Services. The mother is currently unavailable. What exactly are we looking at here?" Dr. Chen pulled up images on a tablet and turned it toward them. "These are preliminary X-rays. There's a large mass in Sarah's abdomen. We need CT scans and possibly an MRI to determine exactly what we're dealing with, but—" "A mass?" Daniel interrupted. "You mean a tumor?" "We don't know yet. It could be a cyst, it could be fluid buildup, it could be any number of things. But whatever it is, it's significant, and it's putting pressure on her internal organs." Patricia was already typing on her phone. "How long has this been developing?" "Based on the size, I'd estimate several months. Possibly longer." Several months. While teachers filed reports that went nowhere, while doctors wrote referrals that got rejected, while neighbors called in concerns that were marked low priority, while Daniel himself had stood outside her door and declared the situation stable. "What happens now?" Daniel asked, his voice rough. "We need to run more tests immediately, but without a legal guardian present to consent." Dr. Chen looked at Patricia. "Can you expedite emergency custody?" Patricia was already dialing a number. "I'm calling the emergency family court judge now, but it's almost midnight. Even if I reach her, the paperwork could take hours." "We don't have hours," Dr. Chen said firmly. "Sarah is in pain. She's malnourished. Her vital signs are concerning. Every minute we wait—" "I understand, doctor, but I can't just—" Daniel's phone rang. The station. He stepped into the hallway to answer. "Harper," he said curtly. "Daniel, it's Captain Morris. I heard you brought in 2 juveniles from a welfare check?" "Yes, sir. Social Services is requesting you stay on as temporary guardian until they can sort out custody. You willing to do that?" Daniel looked through the window at Patricia, still on her phone, frustration evident on her face, at Dr. Chen waiting with barely concealed impatience, at the closed examination room door where Sarah lay in pain. "Sir, I'm 3 weeks from retirement." "I know. That's why I'm asking, not ordering. This gets complicated, Daniel. You could be signing on for weeks of court hearings, medical decisions, potential liability if— I'll do it, Daniel said. Silence on the other end. You sure about this? No, he wasn't sure about anything, but he thought about September 28th, about standing outside that door, about driving away. I'm sure. All right, I'll send over the temporary custody authorization. You'll have legal authority to make medical decisions until social services finds permanent placement. Daniel hung up and walked back into the consultation room. I can sign, he said. Dr. Chen looked up. Excuse me? The police department is granting me temporary custody authority. I can consent to Sarah's treatment. Patricia's eyes widened. Daniel, do you understand what you're agreeing to? You'll be legally responsible for any medical decisions. If something goes wrong, I understand. Dr. Chen was already pulling up forms on his tablet. I need you to authorize a full diagnostic workup, CT scan, MRI, blood work, possibly exploratory surgery depending on what we find. He held out the tablet and a stylus. Daniel took it. His hand didn't shake. He thought of Rebecca, of promises made and broken. He thought of Sarah, 11 years old, lying in pain while everyone had walked past. He signed his name. Dr. Chen took the tablet back. Thank you. We'll start immediately. He left quickly, already calling orders to the nursing staff. Patricia stared at Daniel. Do you have any idea what you just did? Yes. You just made yourself responsible for a child you don't know, medical bills that could run into the hundreds of thousands. Potential legal complications if the mother shows up and contests. I know, Patricia. She shook her head slowly. Why? Daniel looked toward the examination room. Because someone had to stop. Daniel sat in the waiting room while Sarah underwent imaging tests. It was nearly 2 a.m. The hospital had grown quieter. Only the soft beeping of monitors and occasional footsteps of night shift nurses broke the silence. Ellie had finally fallen asleep on the vinyl couch, curled up under a blanket a kind nurse had brought. Her small hand clutched the edge of Daniel's jacket. Patricia had left an hour ago to file emergency paperwork with family court. She'd promised to return in the morning with updates. Daniel watched the little girl sleep, 5 years old, 3 weeks alone with a sister who was too sick to properly care for her. No food, no heat, no adults. And somehow they'd survived. He thought about his own daughter at that age. Rebecca had been fearless, always climbing trees, scraping her knees, coming home with frogs in her pockets. His wife, Margaret, would shake her head and laugh, saying their girl had no sense of danger. But Ellie knew danger intimately. She'd learned to be quiet, to make herself small, to survive on nothing. No child should have to learn those lessons. A nurse approached quietly. Mr. Harper? He looked up. Sarah's asking for her sister. And for you. Daniel gently shook Ellie awake. Hey, sweetheart, want to see Sarah? Ellie's eyes flew open. She sat up immediately, fully alert in the way only frightened children could be. They followed the nurse down a long hallway to a room in the diagnostic wing. Sarah lay in a hospital bed, IV lines running into her arm. She looked so small against the white sheets. Ellie ran to the bedside. Sarah! Hey, Ellie bug, Sarah said softly, managing a weak smile. Ellie grabbed her sister's hand with both of hers, holding tight like she was afraid Sarah might disappear. Daniel stood in the doorway, suddenly feeling like an intruder on a private moment. Sarah looked over at him. They said you signed papers, that you're responsible for us now? Temporarily, Daniel said, until we find your mom or until social services. Mom's not coming back, Sarah said flatly. The certainty in her voice was heartbreaking. You don't know that, Daniel started, but Sarah shook her head. She left her purse, her phone, everything. She didn't want to be found. 11 years old, and she understood abandonment better than most adults. Sarah, Daniel said gently, stepping closer to the bed. I know you've taken care of Ellie for a long time. You've done an incredible job, but now it's time to let someone take care of both of you. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Are they going to separate us? No. How do you know? Daniel didn't know. The system separated siblings all the time. Foster homes didn't always have room for two, especially not when one required extensive medical care. But he couldn't tell her that. "Because I won't let them," he said instead. Ellie looked up at him with those big, frightened eyes, and then she said something that shattered what was left of Daniel's careful emotional walls. "Please don't let them take my sister away from me." The words hung in the air. 7 simple words that carried the weight of a child's entire world. Daniel knelt down beside the bed so he was at eye level with both girls. "Listen to me," he said, his voice steady despite the tightness in his chest. "I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow or next week or next month. I don't know what the doctors are going to find or what social services is going to decide. But I promise you this. I will do everything in my power to keep you together. Do you understand?" Ellie nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. Sarah reached out and took Daniel's hand. Her grip was weak, but determined. "Why are you helping us?" she whispered. "You don't even know us." Daniel thought about Rebecca, about the promise he'd made and broken every day for 11 years, about second chances. "Because I should have helped you sooner," he said quietly. Sarah's eyes searched his face for a long moment. Then she squeezed his hand and whispered 2 words that would change everything. "Thank you." Daniel stayed there, kneeling beside the hospital bed, holding the hand of a child he'd met only hours ago. A child he'd almost walked away from. A child who'd been invisible to everyone, including him. But not anymore. Not ever again. Daniel didn't leave the hospital that night. He sent Ellie to sleep in a reclining chair they'd brought into Sarah's room, covered her with blankets, and settled himself into an uncomfortable plastic seat in the hallway. Sleep didn't come. He sat there in the fluorescent light, listening to the sounds of the hospital at night. Distant machines beeping. Soft conversations at the nurse's station. Someone coughing down the hall. The hum of the ventilation system. Every sound seemed amplified. His phone buzzed at 6:47 a.m. "Captain Morris, emergency custody approved. Your official guardian until court hearing next week. Good luck." Official. The word felt heavier than it should. Daniel stood and walked to the window at the end of the hallway. Dawn was breaking over Millbrook, the same town he'd protected for 42 years, the same streets he'd driven down thousands of times. How many other apartments were out there right now with children sleeping alone? How many calls had been marked low priority and forgotten? How many times had he himself been the one to walk away? At 8:15 a.m., Dr. Chen appeared with a tablet and a grim expression. "We have the imaging results," he said. They went back to the same consultation room from the night before. This time Daniel sat down. His knees wouldn't hold him standing for what he sensed was coming. "Doctor." Chen pulled up images on the screen. Even to Daniel's untrained eye, he could see the problem. A large, irregular mass filled much of Sarah's abdominal cavity. "These are Sarah's CT scans," Dr. Chen said. "The mass we saw on the X-ray is larger than we initially thought. It's pressing against her stomach, intestines, and left kidney." Daniel's mouth went dry. "What is it?" "We won't know for certain until we do a biopsy, but based on the size, location, and imaging characteristics..." "Doctor," Chen paused, "we're concerned it may be malignant." The word hit like a physical blow. Malignant. Cancer. "She's 11 years old," Daniel heard himself say. "I know. Pediatric abdominal tumors are rare, but they do occur. The concerning part is how long this has been growing. Based on the size, I'd estimate this has been developing for at least 6 to 8 months. 6 to 8 months, Daniel thought back. That would put the start around February or March, before the teacher filed her report, before the clinic visit, before his welfare check in September. If someone had caught this earlier. Daniel couldn't finish the sentence. Dr. Chen's expression was carefully neutral, but Daniel saw the answer in his eyes. "Early detection significantly improves outcomes with these types of tumors," the doctor said quietly. "But we can't change the past. We can only move forward." "What's the next step?" "Surgery. We need to remove the mass and biopsy it to determine exactly what we're dealing with. The operation is scheduled for tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. Tomorrow. Daniel's hands began to shake. He gripped the edge of the table to steady them. And the risks? With any surgery, there are risks. Bleeding, infection, complications from anesthesia. But if we don't operate, the tumor will continue to grow. It's already compromising her kidney function. Doctor. Chen pulled out a tablet with consent forms already loaded. I need you to authorize the surgery, Mr. Harper. Daniel stared at the screen. This was it, the moment where everything became real. If he signed, he was responsible. If something went wrong during surgery, if Sarah didn't wake up, if the tumor was worse than they thought, his signature would be on those forms. He thought about the complaint from 5 years ago, about being accused of overstepping, about learning to be careful, to protect himself, to not get too involved. He thought about his pension, 3 weeks away. He thought about the comfortable retirement he'd planned. And then he thought about Sarah, 11 years old, lying in a hospital bed because everyone, including him, had been too careful, too cautious, too afraid to act. He thought about Ellie's voice. Please don't let them take my sister away from me. He thought about Rebecca. Don't let this happen to someone else. His hand stopped shaking. He picked up the stylus. Where do I sign? Dr. Chen showed him the forms. Authorization for surgery. Authorization for anesthesia. Authorization for blood transfusions if needed. Acknowledgement of risks. Daniel read each one carefully. Then he signed his name. Again and again and again. When he finished, Dr. Chen took the tablet back. Thank you, Mr. Harper. We'll take excellent care of her. Daniel nodded, not trusting his voice. He walked back to Sarah's room. Both girls were awake now. A breakfast tray sat untouched on the table. Hey, Sarah said when she saw him. Hey yourself. Are they going to do more tests? Daniel pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down. Sarah, the doctors found something. You're going to need surgery tomorrow morning. Her face went pale. What kind of surgery? They need to remove the mass in your stomach and figure out what it is. Sarah's hand found Ellie's automatically. Am I going to die? She asked quietly. The question sucked all the air from the room. Daniel looked at this brave, broken child who'd already survived so much. No, he said firmly. You're going to fight, and I'm going to be right here the whole time. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. Okay, she whispered. Okay. And in that moment, Daniel knew there was no going back. He'd made his choice. The rest of that day passed in a blur of preparations. Nurses came and went, checking Sarah's vital signs, explaining what would happen during surgery. An anesthesiologist stopped by to discuss the procedure. A chaplain offered to pray with them, which Sarah politely declined. Daniel made phone calls. He contacted his captain to arrange extended leave. He called his neighbor to check on his house. He called Patricia to update her on the surgery. I'm coming by this evening, Patricia said. We found the mother. Daniel's stomach tightened. Where? Clearview Recovery Center. 2 counties over, she checked herself into a 90-day inpatient program for substance treatment 6 days after she left the girls. 6 days. She'd lasted 6 days before deciding to save herself instead of her children. Does she know about Sarah's condition? The facility contacted her this morning. She wants to sign over temporary medical custody to you. She says she's not in a position to make those decisions right now. Not in a position. Daniel closed his eyes and took a slow breath. What about permanent custody? That's complicated. We'll need court hearings, evaluations, home studies. It could take months, but for now, you're the legal guardian. After he hung up, Daniel stood in the hallway for a long moment trying to process everything. A nurse approached. Mr. Harper, Dr. Chen would like to see you again. Daniel's heart sank. More news couldn't be good. He found the doctor in the same consultation room, but this time another physician was with him, an older woman with silver hair and tired eyes. Mr. Harper, this is Dr. Rachel Martinez. She's our pediatric oncologist. Oncologist. The word confirmed his worst fears. We received some preliminary blood test results, Dr. Chen said. Sarah's tumor markers are elevated, significantly elevated. Dr. Martinez pulled up charts on her tablet. These markers indicate the presence of aggressive cell growth. Combined with the imaging, we're now fairly certain that what we're dealing with is a malignant tumor. Daniel felt the room tilt slightly. You're saying it's cancer. We won't have definitive confirmation until after the biopsy tomorrow, Dr. Martinez said carefully. But yes, that's our strong suspicion. The good news is that pediatric sarcomas, while serious, are often responsive to treatment. And the bad news? The two doctors exchanged a glance. The size and location suggest this has been growing for quite some time, Dr. Martinez continued. If we'd caught this 3 or 4 months ago when the tumor was smaller, treatment options would have been more straightforward. As it is, we're looking at aggressive surgery followed by intensive chemotherapy. 3 or 4 months ago, July or August, when Sarah was probably already showing symptoms, when someone should have noticed, when someone should have done something. Dr. Chen, Daniel said slowly, if this had been caught earlier, say in September when she was seen at the county clinic, what would the difference have been? Dr. Chen hesitated. Dr. Chen, Daniel repeated, his voice harder. I need to know. The tumor would have been roughly 60 to 70% smaller, Dr. Chen said quietly. Surgery would have been less invasive, recovery time shorter. The overall prognosis would have been significantly better. Daniel's hands clenched into fists. But we can't change that now, Dr. Martinez said firmly. What we can do is give Sarah the best possible treatment moving forward. The surgery tomorrow will remove as much of the tumor as safely possible. Then we'll start chemotherapy. How long? Daniel asked. The treatment protocol is typically 6 months, possibly longer depending on how she responds. 6 months. Sarah had been suffering alone for 6 months already. Now she faced 6 more months of treatment. A year of her childhood stolen by a disease that should have been caught sooner. Can I tell her? Daniel asked. We recommend waiting until after surgery, Dr. Martinez said gently. Let's take this one step at a time. Daniel nodded numbly and walked back to Sarah's room. Both girls looked up when he entered. What did they say? Sarah asked. Daniel forced a smile he didn't feel. They're going to take good care of you tomorrow. That's what matters. But Sarah wasn't fooled. She was too smart, too observant. It's bad, isn't it? She said quietly. Daniel sat down beside the bed. It's serious, he admitted. But you're strong, and you're not alone anymore. We're going to fight this together. Sarah nodded slowly, but Daniel saw the fear in her eyes. She'd survived abandonment, starvation, months of untreated pain. But this was different. This was a battle she couldn't win alone. None of them could. Ellie climbed onto the bed and curled up next to her sister, careful not to disturb the IV lines. I'm scared, Ellie whispered. Me too, Sarah admitted. Daniel reached out and took both their hands. It's okay to be scared, he said, but you don't have to be scared alone. And they sat there together in the quiet hospital room, 3 people brought together by failure and circumstance, holding on to each other like lifelines. Because sometimes, that's all anyone could do, hold on, and hope it was enough. The surgery was scheduled for 6 a.m. Daniel arrived at the hospital at 5:15, carrying coffee he wouldn't drink and wearing clothes he'd hastily pulled from his closet. Sarah was already awake, lying still in the pre-op room. Ellie sat beside her, holding her hand so tightly her knuckles had turned white. A nurse came in to start the pre-surgical medications. This is going to make you feel sleepy, she explained to Sarah, adjusting the IV. Sarah nodded but didn't take her eyes off Ellie. You're going to stay with her, right? Sarah asked Daniel. While I'm in there, you'll stay with Ellie? I'm not going anywhere, Daniel promised. And when I wake up, you'll both be there? Both of us. I promise. The medication began to take effect. Sarah's eyelids grew heavy. Ellie, she murmured, love you. Love you too, Ellie whispered, tears streaming down her face. An orderly arrived to wheel Sarah to the operating room. Ellie didn't let go of her sister's hand until the last possible second, walking alongside the gurney until they reached the doors marked, Authorized Personnel Only. Sarah's hand slipped from Ellie's. The doors swung shut, and Ellie broke. She collapsed against Daniel, sobbing so hard her whole body shook. He picked her up, something he hadn't done with a child in over a decade, and carried her to the surgical waiting room. He held her while she cried, making soft, soothing sounds that felt inadequate but were all he had to offer. Eventually, her sobs quieted to hiccups, then to exhausted silence. "She's going to be okay," Ellie said, but it sounded more like a question. "The doctors are very good at what they do," Daniel said carefully. Patricia arrived an hour later with changes of clothes for both girls and a bag of toiletries. "Any news?" she asked. "Not yet. They said it could be 6 to 8 hours. Patricia sat down beside him, and they waited in silence. At 10:47 a.m., Dr. Chen emerged from the surgical wing, still in his scrubs. Daniel stood immediately, his heart pounding. The doctor's face was serious, but not devastated. That had to mean something. "The surgery went as well as we could have hoped," Dr. Chen said. "We were able to remove the entire visible tumor. It was larger than the imaging suggested, about the size of a grapefruit, but we got it all." Daniel's legs felt weak with relief. "Can we see her?" "She's in recovery now. It'll be another hour before she's awake enough for visitors. But there's something else we need to discuss." Dr. Martinez appeared behind Dr. Chen, her expression grave. "We did a rapid pathology analysis during surgery," she said. "The tumor is confirmed malignant. It's a type of soft tissue sarcoma called rhabdomyosarcoma." The medical term meant nothing to Daniel. In plain English, it's an aggressive cancer that develops in muscle tissue. In Sarah's case, it originated in her abdominal wall and grew inward, which is why it took so long for external symptoms to appear. "You said you got it all." "We removed all visible tumor tissue," Dr. Chen clarified. "But with this type of cancer, there's always a risk of microscopic cells remaining. That's why chemotherapy is essential." Dr. Martinez pulled up her tablet. "We've reviewed Sarah's case with our tumor board. Given the size and grade of the tumor, we're recommending an intensive chemotherapy protocol. 42 weeks of treatment." 42 weeks. Nearly a year. "What if we'd caught this earlier?" Daniel asked, the question burning in his throat. "In September, when she was at the clinic. What would treatment have looked like then?" Dr. Martinez didn't hesitate this time. "If the tumor had been half this size, we likely would have recommended 24 weeks of less intensive therapy. The surgery would have been outpatient. Her overall prognosis would have been significantly better." "Better by how much?" 5-year survival rates for early-stage rhabdomyosarcoma are around 85%. For advanced stage, like Sarah's, it drops to around 60%. The numbers hit Daniel like bullets. 25%. 25% difference in her chances of surviving the next 5 years. Because people hadn't looked closely enough. Because systems had failed. Because he had failed. "Mr. Harper?" Dr. Martinez's voice was gentle. "I know this is difficult to hear. But Sarah is young and strong. Children often respond better to treatment than adults. We have every reason to be hopeful." Hopeful. That was the word people used when they meant it could go either way. Daniel looked at Ellie, who'd been listening to everything with wide, frightened eyes. "When can she start treatment?" he asked. "We'll give her 2 weeks to recover from surgery, then begin the first cycle of chemotherapy. She'll need to come in every 3 weeks for treatment, with weekly monitoring in between." Patricia was already taking notes. "What kind of support will she need?" "Considerable," Dr. Martinez admitted. "The side effects can be severe. Nausea, fatigue, increased risk of infection, hair loss. She'll need around-the-clock care during the worst of it." Around-the-clock care. For 42 weeks. Daniel was 67 years old, with no experience raising children, no support system, no idea what he was doing. But he looked at Ellie's face and knew there was no choice. "Whatever she needs," he said. "We'll make it work." Dr. Chen nodded. "You can see her in about an hour. She'll be groggy, but she should recognize you." After the doctors left, Daniel sat back down heavily. Patricia put a hand on his shoulder. "Daniel, you don't have to do this alone. We can find—" "I'm not giving up on them," he said firmly. "I'm not suggesting you should. But you need to understand what you're taking on. The medical bills alone. I'll figure it out. Patricia was quiet for a moment. You're a good man, Daniel Harper. No, Daniel said, staring at his hands. A good man would have looked closer in September. A good man wouldn't have waited until it was almost too late. You're here now. That's what matters. But was it enough? Daniel didn't know. All he knew was that a little girl was fighting for her life in a recovery room down the hall, and he was going to be there for every single battle, starting now. Daniel couldn't sleep that night. He'd taken Ellie back to his house, a small two-bedroom he'd lived in alone since Margaret died. The guest room had been empty for years, collecting dust in old boxes. He'd cleared it out in 30 minutes, making up the bed with fresh sheets, setting out towels, trying to make it feel welcoming. Ellie had fallen asleep almost immediately, exhausted from fear and crying. But Daniel sat in his kitchen at 2 a.m. staring at his laptop screen. He'd logged into the police department database using his credentials, pulled up every report related to 847 Maple Street over the past year. There were more than he'd expected. March 15th, anonymous noise complaint. Unit responded, no answer at door, no further action. May 22nd, school truancy officer requested welfare check. Unit responded, spoke with older minor who stated children were homeschooled. No verification requested. July 8th, neighbor reported possible neglect. Children appear unsupervised. Unit responded, situation assessed as stable. September 28th, his own report. Welfare check, minor stated parent at work. Residence adequate, no immediate concerns. 4 calls in 6 months, 4 opportunities, 4 failures. But it wasn't just the police department. Daniel opened another tab and searched for Sarah Monroe in the county systems Patricia had shown him. The paper trail was devastating. Millbrook Elementary, October 14th, attendance alert. Filed with County Social Services. Status, pending review. County Health Clinic, September 22nd. Patient presented with abdominal pain and distension. Recommended imaging and specialist referral. Insurance authorization, denied. Follow-up, none documented. Child Protective Services, anonymous report, October 1st. Priority level, low. Assigned caseworker, none available. Status, open, awaiting resources. Everyone had done something and nothing had been done. Daniel clicked through to his own report from September 28th and read it again. Responded to 847 Maple Street, Apt B at 22:47 hours. Made contact with juvenile female, approximately 11-12 years old, who identified herself as Sarah Monroe. Subject stated mother, Jennifer Monroe, was working night shift. Subject appeared adequately clothed and nourished. Residence modest, but no visible signs of immediate danger or neglect. Subject was cooperative and articulate. Younger sibling reportedly asleep inside. Based on assessment, situation appears stable. Recommended follow-up, none at this time. He'd been thorough by the standards of a routine welfare check. He'd asked the right questions, followed protocol, but he hadn't asked to come inside, hadn't insisted on seeing the mother, hadn't verified that anyone was actually supervising these children. He'd accepted a scared 11-year-old's story at face value because it was easier than digging deeper, because he'd learned, after that complaint 5 years ago, that digging deeper could cost you. His phone buzzed. Text from Patricia. Can't sleep either. He called her. I've been looking at the timeline, she said without preamble. Every agency that touched this case did the bare minimum required by policy, filed the report, made the call, checked the box. But nobody followed through. Because we're not set up to follow through, Daniel. We're set up to triage, to respond to the loudest emergencies. The quiet cases, the ones where children suffer slowly instead of dramatically, those fall through the cracks. Sarah almost died because she fell through a crack. I know. She's 11 years old, Patricia. 11. And she has a 60% chance of surviving the next 5 years because I didn't look hard enough. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. I pulled the recording of the September call, she said finally. The the one from the neighbor. Do you want to know what they said? Yes. They said, and I quote, "There's a young girl at 847 Maple Street who looks pregnant. She can't be more than 12. Someone should check on that." Daniel's stomach dropped. The dispatcher logged it as possible neglect and sent it to patrol. You were the responding officer. I never heard about anyone thinking she was pregnant, because the dispatcher didn't include that detail in your call sheet. They marked it down as welfare check, minor welfare concern. Daniel closed his eyes. Someone had called in specifically worried that an 11-year-old girl might be pregnant, and the information had been filtered, sanitized, reduced to generic bureaucratic language. By the time it reached him, it was just another low-priority call. I should have asked more questions, Daniel said. The neighbor should have called back when nothing changed. The school should have pushed harder when their report went nowhere. The clinic should have found a way to get Sarah those tests even without insurance. I should have assigned the case instead of leaving it in the pending queue. Patricia's voice was tight. We all should have done more. But I was there, Patricia. I was standing outside her door. I could have prevented this. You didn't cause this, Daniel. The system caused this. A mother with untreated addiction caused this. A healthcare system that denies care to children without insurance caused this. Underfunded social services caused this. You were one small part of a much larger failure. That doesn't make me feel better. It's not supposed to. It's supposed to make you angry enough to do better. Daniel was quiet. Sarah's surgery was successful, Patricia continued. She's alive because you finally did look closer. Because you didn't walk away when you could have. That has to count for something. Does it? Or did I just delay the inevitable? Daniel. She has a 60% survival rate, Patricia. 42 weeks of chemotherapy, a year of her childhood stolen. And it didn't have to be this way. His voice broke on the last word. Patricia didn't offer empty comfort. She just stayed on the line, breathing steadily, letting him feel what he needed to feel. Finally, she said quietly, "What are you going to do now?" Daniel looked toward the guest room where Ellie slept. "I'm going to be there. Every doctor's appointment, every treatment, every hard day. I'm going to make sure they know someone sees them. That's all any of us can do." After they hung up, Daniel sat in the dark kitchen for a long time. He thought about September 28th, about standing on that porch, about choosing safety over courage. He couldn't change that night, but he could change what came next. Tomorrow he'd bring Ellie to see Sarah. They'd start planning for the long road ahead. And he'd do what he should have done months ago. He'd stay. Word spread fast in a small town. By the time Daniel brought Ellie to the hospital the next afternoon, Sarah's room had already received visitors. Mrs. Margaret Thompson, Sarah's teacher, had come by that morning with a stuffed bear and a card signed by every student in the 5th grade class. She'd also left something else, an envelope with $127 in small bills. From the class bake sale, the note inside read, "We wanted to help." It wasn't much, but it was something. Patricia met them in the hallway outside Sarah's room. "The school principal called," she said. "They want to organize a fundraiser, and the local news station reached out asking if they could do a story." "No," Daniel said immediately. "No news cameras. These girls have been through enough without being put on display." Patricia nodded. "I told them the same thing. But Daniel, people want to help. We need to let them." Sarah was awake when they entered, propped up on pillows, looking pale but alert. Her eyes lit up when she saw Ellie. "Hey, Bug," she said weakly. Ellie climbed carefully onto the bed, mindful of the IV lines and monitors. "Does it hurt?" she asked. "A little, but they gave me good medicine." Daniel sat in the chair beside the bed. "How are you feeling?" "Tired. The doctor came by this morning. She said I did great in surgery." "You did." Sarah looked at him with those old, knowing eyes. "She also said I have cancer." So they'd told her. "Yes," Daniel said, there was no point in lying. "Am I going to die?" Ellie made a small sound of distress. "No," Daniel said firmly. "You're going to fight, and we're going to fight with you. The doctors have a treatment plan. It's going to be hard, but you're strong enough." Sarah nodded slowly, processing. "Will my hair fall out? Like on TV?" "Probably. Daniel admitted, but it'll grow back. Will I be sick? Sometimes. But we'll be there to help. Sarah was quiet for a moment, then looked at Ellie. I'm scared, she whispered. Me too, Ellie whispered back. They held each other while Daniel sat silently, wishing he could promise them everything would be okay. But he couldn't. All he could promise was presence. Over the next week, help came in unexpected ways. Mrs. Thompson organized her 5th grade class to write letters to Sarah. 23 cards arrived, covered in crayon drawings and misspelled encouragement. The neighbor from 847 Maple Street, Mrs. Rodriguez, showed up at Daniel's door with bags of donated clothes. They were the wrong sizes, but she'd tried. I should have done more, she said, her eyes red. I heard them. I knew something was wrong, but I told myself it wasn't my business. You're here now, Daniel said. She nodded and left quickly, like she couldn't bear to stay. Dr. Patel from the county clinic came to the hospital. He stood awkwardly in Sarah's doorway, holding flowers. I should have insisted on those tests, he said to Daniel. Insurance or no insurance. I should have found a way. You did what you could within the system, Daniel said, though the words felt hollow. The system is broken, Dr. Patel said quietly. But that doesn't excuse me. He left the flowers and walked away, shoulders slumped. The local Methodist church organized a meal train, families signing up to bring dinner to Daniel's house 3 times a week. Some of the food was thoughtful, some was strange casseroles that no one ate. But it was the gesture that mattered. Not everyone was kind. Daniel overheard 2 women talking in the hospital cafeteria. I heard the mother was on drugs, one said. What did she expect would happen? Those poor children never had a chance, the other replied. Born into that kind of situation. Daniel wanted to confront them, to tell them that Sarah and Ellie were more than their circumstances, that they were fighters and survivors and deserved better than pity mixed with judgment. But he didn't. He just walked past, carrying coffee back to Sarah's room. The real surprise came from an unexpected source. A man in his 30s appeared at the hospital one evening, clean cut, wearing business casual clothes. I'm Marcus Webb, he said. I was a student of Mrs. Thompson's 15 years ago. She told me about Sarah. He handed Daniel an envelope. Inside was a check for $5,000. I grew up in the system, Marcus said. Foster care, group homes. I know what it's like when nobody's looking, when you fall through the cracks. He looked toward Sarah's room. Someone helped me when I needed it. A teacher who wouldn't give up. I want to pay it forward. Daniel didn't know what to say. Thank you seemed inadequate. But it was all he had. That night, after Ellie had fallen asleep and Sarah was resting comfortably, Daniel sat in the hallway and counted. The class fundraiser, 127. The church meal train, immeasurable Marcus Webb's donation, $5,000 smaller contributions from people he'd never met. Another $800. It wasn't enough to cover the medical bills, which were already approaching $50,000. But it was something. It was people trying. Imperfectly, sometimes judgmentally, sometimes too late. But trying. Patricia had been right. The system had failed. But people, individual people making individual choices could still make a difference. They couldn't undo September. They couldn't give Sarah back the months of suffering. But they could show up now. And sometimes Daniel was learning. Showing up was enough. Sarah came home from the hospital 12 days after surgery. Daniel had converted his small guest room into a recovery space, a proper bed with clean sheets, a nightlight shaped like a moon, books on the shelf that Patricia had brought, drawings from Ellie taped to the walls. It wasn't much, but it was warm, safe, theirs. The first week was difficult. Sarah tired easily. Even walking from the bedroom to the bathroom left her breathless. The surgical incision across her abdomen was healing, but it hurt when she moved. Daniel learned things he never expected to learn at 67, how to change bandages properly, how to prepare meals for someone with no appetite, how to distract a frightened child at 3 in the morning when the pain medication wore off. Ellie helped in her own way, sitting with Sarah for hours, reading picture books aloud, bringing her water in a pink plastic cup. 2 weeks after surgery, they returned to the hospital for Sarah's first chemotherapy treatment. Dr. Martinez explained the protocol carefully. The medication will be administered intravenously over several hours, she said. Sarah will come in every 3 weeks for treatment. Between sessions, we'll monitor her blood counts weekly. The pediatric oncology wing was designed to be cheerful. Bright colors, cartoon characters on the walls, a play area with donated toys. But no amount of decoration could hide what it was. A place where children fought battles they should never have to fight. Sarah sat in a recliner designed for someone twice her size. A nurse inserted an IV line into her arm, with practiced gentleness. "This might feel cold going in," the nurse warned. Sarah didn't flinch. She'd already learned to endure. Daniel sat beside her, holding her free hand. Ellie curled up in his lap, watching with wide eyes as clear fluid dripped through the tube into her sister's vein. "How long does it take?" Sarah asked. "About 4 hours for this first session," the nurse said. "You can watch TV, read, sleep, whatever makes you comfortable." 4 hours. They watched cartoons. Sarah dozed. Daniel tried to read but couldn't focus. When it was over, Sarah seemed fine. "That wasn't so bad," she said in the car on the way home. Daniel wanted to believe her, but Dr. Martinez had warned him the effects wouldn't hit immediately. She was right. That evening, Sarah started feeling nauseous. By midnight, she was vomiting every 30 minutes. Daniel held a plastic basin, rubbed her back, offered small sips of water that she couldn't keep down. Ellie woke to the sounds of her sister being sick and came to the doorway, clutching her stuffed bear. "Is Sarah going to be okay?" she whispered. "Yes," Daniel said. "This is normal. It's the medicine working." But watching an 11-year-old suffer through the night didn't feel normal. It felt cruel. By morning, Sarah was exhausted and pale. Daniel called the oncology nurse who prescribed anti-nausea medication that helped, but didn't eliminate the problem. The second treatment, 3 weeks later, was worse. Sarah's appetite disappeared completely. She forced down spoonfuls of soup and crackers, but everything tasted wrong, she said. Metallic. Bitter. She lost weight she couldn't afford to lose. The third treatment brought new complications. Sarah's hair started falling out. Not all at once. Gradually. Strands on the pillow. Clumps in the shower drain. Handfuls when she brushed it. She didn't cry about it, she just watched it fall with those same resigned eyes. After a week, she asked Daniel for scissors. "I want to cut it off," she said. "All of it." "Are you sure?" She nodded. So Daniel sat her down in the bathroom and carefully trimmed away what was left. Ellie sat on the edge of the tub, holding her sister's hand the whole time. When he finished, Sarah looked in the mirror at her nearly bald head. "I look sick now," she said quietly. "You look brave," Ellie said. Sarah managed a small smile. Brave and bald. The weeks blurred together. Good days when Sarah had energy to sit up, to eat a little, to smile at Ellie's jokes. Bad days when she couldn't get out of bed, when the nausea was overwhelming, when she cried from exhaustion and pain. Daniel documented everything. Medications, symptoms, questions for the doctors. He learned the language of cancer treatment, neutrophils, white blood cell counts, tumor markers, CT scans. He learned which foods Sarah could tolerate and which made her sick. He learned that sometimes the best thing he could do was simply sit beside her in silence. Mrs. Thompson came by weekly with assignments from school, though Sarah was rarely strong enough to complete them. "Don't worry about the work," Mrs. Thompson said gently. "Just focus on getting better." But Sarah did worry. She worried about falling behind, about her sister, about being a burden. "You're not a burden," Daniel told her one night when she apologized for being sick again. "You're a child who's fighting for her life, and you're doing an incredible job." "I'm tired of fighting," she whispered. "I know, but you don't have to fight alone." He held her hand until she fell asleep. In the quiet darkness, Daniel wondered how much longer they could sustain this, how much more a child's body could endure, how much more he could watch her suffer. But quitting wasn't an option. so they kept going. One treatment at a time, one day at a time, one breath at a time. 4 months into treatment, something shifted. Sarah's latest scans showed what Dr. Martinez cautiously called encouraging results. "The tumor hasn't returned," she said, reviewing the images on her tablet. "Her blood markers are trending in the right direction. If she continues responding this well over the next few months, her prognosis improves significantly." It was the first genuinely good news they'd received. Daniel felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in months: hope. Sarah was cautiously optimistic too. She still felt sick after treatments, still tired easily, but there was something different in her eyes. Less resignation, more fight. "Does this mean I can go back to school?" she asked. "Let's see how you do with the next 2 treatments," Dr. Martinez said. "If your immune system stays strong, we can talk about partial attendance." Partial attendance felt like a miracle. Patricia finalized the custody paperwork 3 weeks later. She arrived at Daniel's house with official documents and a tired smile. "You're now Sarah and Ellie's legal temporary guardian," she said, handing him the folder. "The judge granted you custody pending annual reviews." "Not permanent?" Daniel asked. "You're 67 years old and single. The system typically prefers younger placements for long-term foster care. But given the circumstances and the girl's wishes, the judge is making an exception." Daniel signed the papers. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Sarah's hair began growing back in small, uneven patches, dark fuzz that Ellie loved to touch gently. "You look like a baby bird," Ellie said one morning, making Sarah laugh, a sound Daniel hadn't heard in weeks. They settled into something resembling normal life. Mornings. Daniel made breakfast while Ellie got ready for school. Sarah joined them when she had energy, staying in bed when she didn't. Afternoons, Daniel drove Ellie to and from school. Sometimes Sarah came along for the ride, sitting quietly in the back seat, watching the world pass by. Evenings, dinner together at the small kitchen table, simple meals, conversation about Ellie's day, about books Sarah was reading, about nothing in particular. It wasn't the life any of them had planned, but it was theirs. The medical bills continued mounting. Daniel's savings were nearly depleted. The fundraising efforts had helped, but they couldn't keep pace with chemotherapy costs, specialist appointments, and medications. He sold his truck and bought a used sedan, canceled his cable, cut every expense he could. Marcus Webb stopped by one evening with another check. "I can't keep taking your money," Daniel said. "You're not taking it. I'm giving it. There's a difference." He also brought something else: contact information for a nonprofit that helped families with pediatric cancer expenses. "They helped me when I was sick as a kid," Marcus said. "They might be able to help Sarah." Daniel applied that night. 2 weeks later, they received approval for partial coverage of Sarah's remaining treatments. It wasn't everything, but it was enough to keep going. In late spring, Sarah attended school for the first time in 7 months. Just 2 hours. Just one class period. But she walked through those doors wearing a colorful hat covering her patchy hair, carrying a backpack, looking almost like a normal 6th grader. Mrs. Thompson had prepared the class. No staring, no uncomfortable questions. Just welcome her back. When Sarah came home that afternoon, she was exhausted but smiling. "Everyone was nice," she said, "even the kids who used to ignore me." "That's good," Daniel said. "Mrs. Chen gave me her notes from the lessons I missed. And Maya asked if I wanted to sit with her at lunch next time. Next time. The promise of continuity, of future, of normal." That evening, Daniel made spaghetti, one of the few meals Sarah could usually tolerate. They sat at the table together. Sarah managed half a plate. Ellie ate enthusiastically. Daniel pushed food around, too full of emotion to be hungry. "Daniel?" Sarah said quietly. "Yeah? Thank you for everything. You don't have to thank me." "Yes, I do. You didn't have to help us. You could have just done your job and left. But you stayed." Daniel's throat tightened. "I'm glad I stayed," he said. And he meant it. Late that night, after both girls were asleep, Daniel sat on his back porch. The neighborhood was quiet. Streetlights casting soft yellow pools on the pavement, a dog barking somewhere in the distance. He thought about September, about that door he'd almost walked away from. He thought about all the moments since then, the fear, the exhaustion, the medical bills, the sleepless nights. He wouldn't change any of it. For the first time in 11 years, his house didn't feel empty. For the first time since Rebecca died, he felt like he was living instead of just existing. Two broken girls and a broken old man, somehow making a family out of nothing but presence and stubbornness. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. And tomorrow, they'd wake up and do it all again. Together. 3 weeks before Sarah's final scheduled chemotherapy treatment, Daniel took both girls to the hospital for a routine scan. It should have been a formality, a checkpoint on the road to recovery. Instead, it became their worst nightmare. Dr. Martinez called Daniel into her office while Sarah was still in radiology. That alone told him something was wrong. "The scan shows a small abnormality," she said carefully, "in the area where the original tumor was located." Daniel felt the floor drop away. What kind of abnormality? "We can't tell from imaging alone. It could be scar tissue from the surgery. It could be inflammation from the treatment. Or—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. "You think the cancer came back," Daniel said flatly. "We need to do a biopsy to know for certain. It's scheduled for tomorrow morning. Tomorrow. No time to prepare, no time to process. Just another surgery, another wait, another roll of the dice." Daniel didn't tell Sarah until they got home. She sat on the couch, Ellie pressed against her side, and listened while he explained as gently as he could. "They found something on the scan. They need to check it." Sarah's face went pale. "The cancer's back. We don't know that yet, but it might be." "Yes, it might be." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that broke Daniel's heart. "I don't want to do this anymore." "Sarah, I'm tired, Daniel. I'm so tired. I've been sick for almost a year, and now it might be starting all over again." Ellie started crying silently, tears streaming down her face. "I know you're tired," Daniel said, "but we're not giving up. Not now. Not ever." "What if I want to give up?" The question hung in the air. Daniel moved to sit beside her on the couch. "Then I'll carry you through it," he said quietly, "until you're strong enough to fight again. That's what family does." Sarah looked at him with those old, tired eyes. "Are we family?" she asked. "Really?" "Yes," Daniel said without hesitation. "Really." The biopsy was scheduled for 8 a.m. Daniel barely slept. He heard Sarah moving around in her room throughout the night, unable to rest. At 3 a.m. he found her sitting in the kitchen, staring at nothing. "Can't sleep?" he asked. She shook her head. He made hot chocolate, the instant kind that Sarah could usually tolerate, and they sat together in the quiet darkness. "I've been thinking about my mom," Sarah said suddenly. Daniel waited. "I used to be so angry at her for leaving, but now I kind of understand." "Sarah, sometimes things get too hard. Sometimes you just want it to stop." She looked at him. "Do you think she thinks about us?" "I think she thinks about you every day," Daniel said. "And I think she made a choice she thought was right, even though it hurt you." "Was it the right choice?" "I don't know. But I do know that you're stronger than she was. You've survived things that would have broken most people. I don't feel strong. Strength isn't about not being scared or tired. It's about keeping going even when you are." Sarah considered this. "Will you be there tomorrow, during the surgery?" "I'll be right there when you fall asleep and right there when you wake up." "Promise?" "Promise." The pre-op room was cold and sterile. Sarah changed into a hospital gown, her thin frame lost in the fabric. The nurse started the IV line with practiced efficiency. Ellie held Sarah's hand, refusing to let go. "I love you," Ellie whispered. "Love you too, Bug." The anesthesiologist came in to explain the procedure. Sarah nodded along, but Daniel could see the fear in her eyes. When the orderly arrived to wheel her to surgery, Ellie finally released her sister's hand. Sarah looked back at them as they wheeled her away. And then she was gone. The surgery was supposed to take 2 hours, Daniel and Ellie sat in the waiting room. Minutes crawled by like hours. Patricia arrived with coffee and a gentle presence. Mrs. Thompson stopped by during her lunch break. Marcus Webb sent a text. "Thinking of you all." At the 2-hour mark, there was no update. 3 hours. Daniel's anxiety climbed higher with each passing minute. At 3 hours and 45 minutes, Dr. Chen finally appeared, still in scrubs. Surgical mask pulled down. Expression unreadable. Daniel stood, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it. "There was a complication during the biopsy," Dr. Chen said. "Unexpected bleeding. We had to extend the surgery to control it." "Is she okay?" Daniel managed to ask. "She's stable, but we need to make a decision quickly. The bleeding indicates the tissue is more fragile than we anticipated. We can either close now and risk recurrent bleeding, or we can remove a larger section of tissue to ensure we get everything. What are the risks? If we remove more tissue, there's potential for organ damage, but if we don't, and this is cancer, we're leaving cells behind that could spread." Daniel felt the weight of the decision crushing down on him. 67 years old, no medical training, no right to be making life or death choices for someone else's child, but here he was. "Dr. Chen," he said slowly, "what would you do if Sarah were your daughter?" The doctor didn't hesitate. "I'd remove the tissue. Better to deal with complications we can manage than cancer we can't." Daniel looked at Ellie, who was watching him with those big, frightened eyes. He thought about September, about hesitating on that porch, about all the times fear had stopped him from acting. Not this time. "Do the surgery," he said. "Remove everything you need to remove. I'll need your signature." A nurse appeared with a tablet and consent forms. Daniel took the stylus. His hand shook, and then Ellie's small hand wrapped around his. "You didn't leave last time," she whispered. The same words, different meaning, not about staying in the apartment, about staying in the fight, about not giving up when it got hard. Daniel's hand steadied. He signed the authorization. "Save her," he said. Dr. Chen nodded and disappeared back through the surgical doors, and Daniel and Ellie sat down to wait. Together. The surgery took another 4 hours. Daniel and Ellie didn't move from the hallway outside the surgical wing. The waiting room had been too crowded, too bright, too full of other people's crises. So they sat on the floor against the cold wall, Daniel's back aching, Ellie curled against his side. The clock on the wall ticked past noon. Then 1 p.m. Then 2. A coffee machine at the end of the hall flickered and died with a mechanical groan. No one came to fix it. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in harsh white light. Daniel counted the tiles on the floor, watched nurses pass by in soft-soled shoes, listened to distant monitors beeping somewhere deeper in the hospital. Ellie dozed fitfully, waking every few minutes to ask if there was news yet. There never was. Patricia came back around 3 p.m. with sandwiches neither of them could eat. At 4:17 p.m., Dr. Chen finally emerged. This time Dr. Martinez was with him. Daniel stood slowly, his joints protesting. Ellie scrambled to her feet beside him. The doctors' faces were carefully neutral, professional. Daniel couldn't read them. "The surgery is complete," Dr. Chen said. "Sarah's in recovery." "And?" Daniel's voice came out hoarse. Dr. Martinez stepped forward. "We removed all the questionable tissue and sent it for rapid pathology during surgery." She paused. Daniel's heart stopped. "It's not cancer," she said. The abnormality was scar tissue with unusual vascularization that caused the bleeding. But there's no evidence of malignancy. No cancer cells. The words didn't register at first. Not cancer. Ellie made a sound, half sob, half laugh. Daniel felt his knees give way. He caught himself against the wall. "You're sure?" he managed to ask. "We're sure," Dr. Martinez said gently. "Sarah's scans are clear. The biopsy is clear. She's cancer-free." Ellie launched herself at Daniel, wrapping her arms around his waist, crying into his shirt. He held her, his own vision blurring with tears he'd been holding back for months. "However," Dr. Martinez continued, and Daniel's relief faltered, I need to be very clear about something. Sarah went through significant surgical trauma today. Recovery will take time. And while she's cancer-free now, she'll need monitoring for the rest of her life. Regular scans, blood work, vigilance. The risk of recurrence never completely disappears. But she's going to be okay, Ellie asked, her voice muffled against Daniel's shirt. Yes, Dr. Martinez said, and she smiled, the first real smile Daniel had seen from her in months. She's going to be okay. They let Daniel and Ellie into recovery an hour later. Sarah lay in the bed, pale and groggy from anesthesia, but breathing steadily. When she saw them, her eyes filled with tears. "Hey," she whispered. "Hey yourself," Daniel said, pulling a chair close to the bed. Ellie climbed up carefully and took her sister's hand. "The doctor said you don't have cancer anymore," Ellie said. Sarah looked at Daniel for confirmation. "It's true," he said. "You're clear." Sarah closed her eyes. Tears slipped down her temples. "I thought," she started, then stopped. "I know," Daniel said quietly. "We all did." They sat together in silence for a long moment, just breathing, just being present. Finally, Sarah opened her eyes again. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you recover," Daniel said. "You get strong again. You go back to school. You live your life." "With you?" Daniel felt his throat tighten. "If you want to." "We want to," Sarah said firmly. Ellie nodded emphatically. "Then yes," Daniel said. "With me. For as long as you need." 4 months later, on a crisp October afternoon, Daniel drove to 847 Maple Street for the last time. The duplex was being demolished. The city had condemned the building after inspectors found structural damage and code violations. But Daniel had received permission to retrieve any remaining personal belongings before the demolition crew arrived. Sarah and Ellie sat in the back seat as he parked across the street. They stared at the building in silence. "I can't believe we lived there," Ellie said quietly. Sarah didn't respond. She just looked at the door of apartment B. The same door Daniel had stood outside that cold night almost a year ago. The door he'd almost walked away from. "Do you want to go in?" he asked. Sarah hesitated, then nodded. They crossed the street together. Daniel pushed open the door. It was unlocked, hanging slightly crooked on its hinges. The apartment was exactly as he'd found it that night. Empty except for the mattress on the floor, now covered in dust. The broken refrigerator, the silence. Sarah walked to the corner where she and Ellie had slept. She stood there for a moment, remembering. "I used to lie here and wonder if anyone would ever notice us," she said softly. "If anyone would care enough to stop." Daniel's chest ached. "I'm sorry I didn't stop sooner." Sarah turned to look at him. "But you did stop," she said. "That's what matters." She walked to a small closet and pulled out a box. Inside were a few photographs, some of Ellie's drawings, a blanket. "This is all I want," she said. They gathered the items and walked back outside. Daniel locked the door for the last time. As they drove away, Daniel glanced in the rearview mirror. Sarah was looking back at the duplex, her expression unreadable. "You okay?" he asked. She turned to face forward. "Yeah," she said. "I'm ready to go home." Home. Daniel's small house with the 2 bedrooms and the kitchen table where they ate dinner together every night. Home wasn't perfect. Sarah still had checkups every 6 weeks. She still tired more easily than other kids. She still had nightmares sometimes. Ellie still woke up some nights to check that Sarah was breathing. Daniel still thought about September, about all the ways he'd failed before he'd finally gotten it right. But they had each other, and they showed up. Every day, they chose to stay. That evening, they made dinner together. Nothing fancy. Spaghetti and garlic bread. Sarah set the table. Ellie folded napkins with exaggerated care. They sat down together, 3 people who'd been brought together by failure and circumstance and second chances. "Daniel," Sarah said. "Yeah? Thank you for not walking away that night." Daniel looked at these 2 remarkable girls who'd survived more than any child should have to endure. "Thank you for letting me stay," he said. And he meant it with everything he had. because the truth was simple. He hadn't saved them. They'd saved each other. The end.